Buenos dias. Hello to everyone. My name is Armando Rendon. I'm with the Somos Escrito magazine, a very active aspect of the Somos and Escrito Literary Foundation. And today we have the pleasure of meeting with Sergio Troncoso, a Tejano. Like myself, I had to tell people that there are some connections between the two of us, other than writing. We have a number of questions. We have with us Scott Duncan-Fernandez, who is handling the technical part and will also be asking questions. And Jenny Irizary, who is another one of our editors. And we're all happy to have the pleasure of meeting with you, Sergio. I want to jump right in and ask you a question about how you describe your trajectory as a writer. You identify as a Chicano writer, and so do I. And to me, my trajectory was starting out pretty much as just a general writer, a journalist, and not really too much involved. And I'm talking about many, many years ago. But I wonder what your trajectory has been, let's say, since you either discovered Chicanismo or discovered you, and you began writing. How did that trajectory go?
I mean, I would identify myself probably in three different ways. And I think most writers, have, maybe some sort of similar identity, because all of them play a part in my writing. Certainly as a Chicano writer, because of where I grew up and my influences, especially early on, and still to some extent today. I would say also as a literary fiction writer, because those are some of the things, some of the stories, some of the works that I am focused on. I'm not necessarily writing thrillers. I'm not writing horror. I am interested in literary fiction. And probably the last identity that I would adopt, and adopted actually very early, which, scared and confused a lot of Chicano writers, is I write philosophy in fiction. And the very first story I wrote was about a Yale graduate student calling his abuelita and arguing about Heidegger. Mm-hmm. And people said, "What the hell are you doing?" The people who were interested in philosophy and fiction said, "What are you doing? That's interesting, but what, I don't, how does that mesh with, with the ideas writing about people on the border?" And the people on the border, the other Chicanos, had never seen anything like that. So it's all those three identities in me are very important, are constant identities. And if I were to describe my own trajectory, I would say haphazard, learning on the fly, not a careerist writer. I'm interested in characters and ideas, and I'm interested in writing about people who are ignored and forgotten along the border and elsewhere. And my basic motivation very long ago that has never stopped has been to write about los de abajo, the underdogs, the certainly starting with people like my parents who were from Juarez and came over to Isleta on the east side of El Paso with nothing. We didn't even have electricity when we started. We had kerosene lamps and stoves, and we had an outhouse in the backyard. But did they sit around, and my abuelita, who was in El Segundo Barrio, in El Paso, and, we would talk issues about God and what later I understood were philosophical questions. So all of that stuff was in Isleta before I ever left for Harvard or Yale. I mean, I would spend nights talking to my abuelita about how she survived the Mexican Revolution, how you determine character in somebody who's approaching you, And your decisions about that determination may either save your life or put your life in jeopardy. And these are all very basic philosophical questions. I mean, of course, I went to Harvard and I went to Yale, and I understood, oh, this is what we were doing. But we were doing it before I could put a name to it. And so and so, you know, for me, it was a process that began with leaving, uh, you know, Isleta, leaving this home, and not really knowing where I was going. You know, I had not known what the Ivy League was. You know, it was beyond fish out of water. People really don't understand. They see me now. You know, I teach at Yale, and you know, I've somewhat become an insider. But at the beginning, I was alone. My parents never visited me at Harvard until I graduated. So for 4 years, I was alone, figuring it out, figuring how to write a term paper, how to footnote correctly, you know, from the very basic things. Um, and uh, and I almost quit many times, but I didn't give up. And a lot of it was this: I didn't want to go back, you know, as you know, having failed in front of my parents, having failed in front of my abuelita, who is still a very important muse in my life. I hear them in my head every day, and I write about them. And by the way, this is very Mexican. I feel it's very Mexicano. You know, my parents are present in me. I talk to them, and my abuelita as well. It is not, they're not separate from who I was. So anyway, so I would describe my trajectory, Armando, as you asked. Haphazard, I left home, tried to figure out what the heck happened to me, ended up studying Mexico and America Latina at Harvard and a little bit at Yale, because they don't teach you any of this in Texas high schools. I didn't know anything about Mexican history, Juarez history, the revolutionary history in El Paso, none of it. And so suddenly I'm over there in Boston, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell happened to me. Who am I? I'm a Chicano. What's that history? What's the history of Mexico? And so I set upon a multi-year effort at self-education, at taking courses with John Womack, you know, the great Mexican historian at Harvard, Terry Carl, who became my thesis advisor, who was a Latin Americanist, and you know, ended up getting a Latin American certificate at Harvard. I focused on government, but I took about every probably history course, political science course, and some sociology courses, and etc. on Mexico, on America Latina, on political science. So anyway, so and then it just kept going from there.
You didn't find yourself in any of those writings, though. I would.
What do you mean?
In
Which
other words,
writers?
in terms of as a Chicano, Mexican American, I had the same experience where I went to college. That I never saw myself in any of the readings.
You mean like Terry Carl and my professors?
Well,
Is that who you mean?
I don't know, but in your writings, and
But who are you referring to when you say your writings?
I'm referring to the persons that you read, the books that you read.
You mean like when I'm studying the political economy of Mexico?
Right, but did you find yourself, you as a Mexican American, as a Chicano, did you find yourself there? Were you in you know, enlarged? Were you enhanced by that kind of studies?
Well, I mean,
It
it's
affect
not.
your writing, and it
Yeah,
affect your writing.
yeah. I mean, what I'm trying to answer your question. You know, at Harvard, I mean, I'm not going to find myself in a text on history, you know, even if it's written by a Chicano or Rudolfo,
Mhm.
it was reading politics and history, and the literary writing only came after I graduated from Harvard. So I would say all of the stuff I read at a place like Harvard was mostly informational. You know, if I found myself in anything, it was in Zapata and the Mexican Revolution, probably still considered the best book in English on Latin American history, even by the Mexicanos, and it was written by John Womack, who the Marxist historian, chairman of the history department at Harvard. And the way he wrote his history was to write it almost like a novel. At the beginnings of Zapata, and having researched every single archive in Mexico on Zapata. And so the scholarship and the writing was, if I found myself in anything, it would have been in something like that. But in the literary writers, I didn't really start discovering those people that reflected me until I went to Mexico. I went to Mexico for a year. I got a Fulbright, and I started reading Garcia Marquez. I started reading Vargas Llosa, Octavio Paz, Gabriela Mistral. Latin American after Latin American writer. And why? Because some of these writers, this fantastic thing about living in Mexico City, in Coyoacan in 1983, 84, some of these writers would come in to Libreria Gandhi, which is like the Strand of New York City. It is a great bookstore in Mexico, and Garcia Marquez would show up and give a reading, and so I started reading more of those Latin American writers, literary writers, and then later started getting into Ortega Gasset and some of the philosophical writers, some of the Russians, Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, Thomas Mann, and even spent some time in Vienna. This is as a grad student, reading some of the German writers that I found attractive. And of course, I discovered Rodolfo Anaya, and discovered many of the other great Chicano writers, Rolando Hinojosa as well, and Sandra Cisneros. So I started going through it, but a lot of it was self-education. Right. Finding out what happened to me. Because none of this stuff was assigned in any course in Isleta. None of it.
Of course not. Yeah, of course not.
Zero.
Maybe you could talk about maybe the importance of representation, because as a Mexican American, because your books are actively doing that right now. You're representing Mexican American experience, and not just fictionized and
and nonfiction.
Yeah, nonfiction too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first thing, if you look at, for example, the book I edited last year, Nepantla Familias, and it's the collection, an anthology of Mexican American literature and families in between worlds. I know most of these writers, not all of them, and I got to know many of them, talking to them and exchanging ideas, and some of them, some of them from scratch, because and pushing them actually to things that were a little edgy for them, or that they didn't want to go emotionally into that, but I wanted to talk to them, and they know me as a writer, and I think one of the first things you discover is that being Mexican American Chicano, it's such an incredible variety. Mm-hmm. And if you go against that and how it's been changing, you won't understand really how Mexican American and the readership is evolving. When I was growing up, yes, it mattered, that you would have literature about La Pizca, and literature about, working in the fields, fighting against, farm worker oppression. But what has happened, just like you see what's going on in El Paso, is the Mexican middle class has grown. At UTEP, which is an 85% Mexican American institution, right? University of Texas at El Paso. For the first time ever, 2 years ago, the entering class was not majority first generation. There were still all Mexicanos, but what happened is now the Mexicans who went to UTEP are sending their kids to UTEP. Right. So for the first time ever, the Mexican American population at UTEP, it's actually the second generation going for a college education. And that's been happening all across the board, whether people like it or not. And that's what I saw in the Pantla Familia. You have Stephanie Lee, for example, a great writer from Kansas City, in which her father is Chinese and her mother's Mexicana. I don't know if, I don't like the term Hispanic, but Latinos, certainly Mexican Americans, they intermarry with everybody, right? They intermarry with African Americans, with people who are Jewish, people who are indigenous, people who are, Italian, Irish, etc. That's another reality of life. And so some of the writings that I saw that people contributed show that variety. Some of them live on the border, some of them don't. Some of them have gone deep into the United States, whether it's Kansas City or Boulder, Colorado, or some other places, maybe Minneapolis, Minnesota, where you wouldn't typically find a lot of Chicanos or Mexican Americans, but you do now. And even like someone like Sandra Cisneros, who's become sort of a little bit of a friend over the, and I always saw Sandra as, one of my heroes. And we ended up exchanging and even having a lot of conversations over Zoom, actually. She went the other way. She went to Mexico, because she wanted to experience Mexico, but also, as she told me, she wanted to get away from all the chisme and all the noise that is in the Mexican American community on this side. Simply to write, she went to San Miguel. Para que no le estén fregando, no la están molestando todo el tiempo. And so and a Mexican American Indian in Mexico, and so one of the things you have to understand is there is no, there's no one Mexican American, and people who do that, I'll be very blunt, I think they're bullshitters. This idea that there's an authentic Mexican American, it's just simply a way to beat someone up, psychologically. There's no such thing. There are Mexican Americans who don't know a word of Spanish. There are Mexican Americans who are fluent. There are Mexican Americans who know Italian. And I think one of the things I wanted to show in the Pantla Familia is this incredible variety that begins with people who care about their heritage. And sometimes they're very separated from it, like Stephanie Elizondo Grice, and make an effort to connect with Mexico and that parent who came from there. And if you read her piece, for example, her father dies. Her mother is the one who was Mexicana, right? Her father, who is an Americano, dies. And she goes to Mexico to understand Dia de los Muertos on behalf of her Anglo father. So think about the borders you're crossing there. Multiple borders, geographic, psychological, cultural, to teach yourself. What is this background I have? I had the more traditional Mexican American background. Both my parents were Mexican. They were from Juarez, and they came over in the 50s and became, American citizens, although they never left more than a mile or two away from Mexico. And they spoke Spanish all their lives. And, my mother was much more gung-ho American. And my father left Mexico because his girlfriend, my mother, left Mexico, and he regretted it, although he didn't like the corruption, and which is why he left. And if you want that story, I'll tell you that story. But so for me, it was, on the one hand, expanding the sense of Mexican Americans, but also being specific about how people are trying to create that relationship within themselves. For me, it was going to Mexico right after college. And honestly, I didn't know where I belonged. Given a few turn of events, I might have stayed in Mexico City and said, so long, the United States. I'm not interested. And that's where I was right after college. Where do I belong? You know, my Spanish was good enough that I could fit in Mexico, and my English was good enough that I could fit here. So I took it as a project, as a real project, to find out, you know, where do I belong? And I think this yin yang in between borders, linguistic, geographic, psychological, that is very Mexican American. That's a true Mexican American in my mind, that you're living in between. If you're not like that, I think you probably have become something very different.
I think that's probably very evident in the use of Spanglish. I mean, if you don't have mastery either one, you use Spanish.
Well, you might have mastery of both, but you might actually prefer Spanglish.
Right.
You know, people assume, if I start speaking like my friends speak in Isleta, that I'm an idiota or whatever. And sometimes, by the way, it's the older Mexicanos who think that, and they're wrong. It's actually, I prefer it. I prefer the musicality of it. And that's why I do it. And I do it because whoever I might be happen to be speaking to prefers that, we kind of connect on that level. So I think we need to broaden our minds. And I don't want to be controversial and take on all the editors from Somos en Escrito. But I'm very pugilistic because I've been through the ringer, all sorts of things. I'm still the only Chicano Mexican American at Yale in the Yale Writers Workshop, but they know me, and they know that they've read my books, they've engaged with me, and that's been another project, which is I don't want to be an abstraction. I don't want to be what Donald Trump tells you Mexicanos are supposed to be. I want people to meet me and have an exchange with me and meet my parents or my brothers and have a real exchange so that you open people's minds through empathy. Because that's what I believe a basic issue of our writing should be about, opening people's minds.
I mean, I agree, but I mean, personally, I'm a Chicano. I don't ascribe to this yin yangness. I'm also a half breed because my dad's a white guy. But to me, to me, this this has been the foggy stuff, and I'm against this abstraction because we are a whole people. We've been here. This is like the U.S. crossed us, and so it's like
right.
It's not like I don't belong there. I don't belong other places. I belong right where I am.
Right. See, I don't see Nepantla as foggy at all.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as a real writer, a real thinker lives with uncertainty. As soon as you start having, I know everything, you're actually very much akin to a Donald Trump, but from the other side. No, honestly, you want to be real. That's real. As soon as you feel you have it all figured out, in my mind, you stop being curious, you stop thinking. And I don't think it's foggy at all. I think it's actually very dangerous when you're very certain about X, Y, or Z, whether it's from the left or from the right.
Now that you brought that up, that former president.
Listo.
You were a former president of the Texas Institute of Letters. I understand you
just ended Saturday. Yes.
And I wonder if you had ever thought that you would be put in the position when you became president that you would have to, take on the lieutenant governor of Texas and the governor of Texas because they decided that it was inappropriate to have a debate of any kind, maybe, about a book that was about the Alamo. And you made a statement, published it, I think, on behalf of the Institute.
Right.
First of all, was that kind of a shock to you that you got into that kind of an entanglement?
No, not really. I mean, it's people from the TIL told, because I got hundreds of writers to sign that statement, and it wasn't just, I wrote the statement, and I did something different. Instead of saying this is a statement from the Texas Institute of Letters, I said, put your damn name on it. Put your name on it if you believe in this. And you don't have to. We have hundreds of members, but I think over almost, I don't know, 180, 150 put their names on it. and I, again, I don't want them to hide behind me or the Texas Institute of Letters. And I think it's a disgrace, what Abbott and the lieutenant governor are doing in terms of politicizing the kinds of books we have in libraries, the kinds of books that you have at state institutions, like Forget the Alamo, and Forget the Alamo was written by TIL members, who are not Chicanos. And so for me, it was, as people told me, the TIL used to, in the 70s or a long time ago, get involved in politics a little more. And so in some ways I was returning to that. I didn't know that history, but I said, we have to confront this, because if there's anything that the Texas Institute of Letters or a literary organization should stand against, it's against the banning of books, against state institutions trying to tell readers what to read, what to have in libraries, what's correct and what's not correct. And and now they're working on libraries, on public libraries and school libraries, to try to eliminate books on transgender issues, on gay issues, on women, and on empowering girls, and all sorts of other issues that make them uncomfortable. What the hell do you think education is about? Education is about making you think. It's about unmooring you. It's about making you reconsider your previous position that you had. If you're not opening your brain with by a teacher asking you hard, difficult questions and showing you books about something different from you, you're not being educated. You're being indoctrinated. And so I think they really miss the sense of education is supposed to make you feel a little uncomfortable, make you question your prejudices, make you question what you brought into any kind of reading group or workshop or classroom. And of course, it's to score political points. Mm-hmm. It's to get more conservatives on the board. And I think what we have to do is you have to run for the school board. It's not a top-down, you have to engage those people at the meetings. You have to show them, the writers at those particular board meetings, school board meetings, why this book might matter to your child or to that child, and why it's important to have a great variety and diversity in the community, because not everyone is like you, not everyone is like me, and they still might ignore you. They still might think you're crazy. They still might not listen to you. But that has to be how you confront these people. Don't let them smear you with stereotypes. Show them why and what you're going to win. You're not going to win the crazy people who are determined to ban you. What you're may win are the people right in the middle, the people not sure, the people who don't read the books and might just accept what some crazy person tells you about XYZ book or XYZ writer. Those are the people you might win. And that's the fight you have to do. But it has to be, I think, a local fight. And so I'm glad, as the president of the Texas Institute of Letters, that we put out a statement. But let me just tell you, and I just gave a big speech, my farewell remarks on Saturday at Ardovino's in El Paso. We inducted during my 2-year term, and I was only the last one. I think that there were many who came before me who were also doing this. Kip Stratton, Steve Davis, and then Carmen Tafoya, and then me. But during my year, we inducted more Mexican-American writers, African-American writers, more Asian-American writers, than probably in any of those other administrations before us. The president doesn't determine, but leads the council into lifetime achievement. Who were my 2 Lifetime Achievement Award winners? Benjamin Alire Saenz, whom who probably should have won the award 10 years ago, right? Or 20 years ago. And Celeste Bedford Walker, the first African-American writer from Texas to ever win the award. And of course, she should have won it 10, 20 years ago. maybe 15 years ago. She's written like 40 plays and been reviewed all over the New York Times. Um, and and uh, and so and the judges, the president of the Texas Institute of Letters chooses every judge in 12 awards we give. So about 36 judges. I appointed Chicanos, women, etc., as not just the judges, but the chairman of those committees. And then I oversaw those committees. And the winners that they chose, just take a look at our website at who they chose. And so my point was, as president, I wanted to represent all of Texas, every community, and not just the allergy capital of the world, as I called it. I wanted to get away from white guys from Austin and Dallas, right? Go to McAllen, go to Corpus, go to El Paso. They're great, right? And all the rural communities, let's say not just the border communities, but other rural communities within Texas, where great writing is being done. And you can determine that it's great writing and try to keep the organization moving forward. So that's what I did. So it was more than just confronting, the banning of Forget the Alamo at the Bullock Museum in Austin. And putting out a statement. It was the judges I chose, the winners they chose, the new members we inducted, the lifetime award winners that we chose. And let me just tell you, the last thing I said is, and the full transcript was picked up, and the El Paso Public Library is going to have it on record. I also said, I'm a feminist. And the reason I'm a feminist was beginning with my abuelita and who she was, and how the toughness she showed me, my mother, how she struggled, how I felt she was smarter than my father, but she accepted her role as a Mexican mother, and she had a photographic memory, which more or less I have a little bit of that. And then my wife, who has, struggled against all sorts of machismo, in her work. And I hear about that daily. So for me, it was and it maybe shocks people for somebody to talk so forthrightly and directly, but I don't have anything to lose. And in fact, Ben Symes, somebody I really revere and like as a writer, right before I gave my farewell speech, he went 5 minutes on how I had helped really transform this organization. And for me, that meant everything to me. That people notice, that people wake up, that there are some people really taking leadership roles and are ready to take any fights that come on, and are transforming organizations from within. Because too many writers just sit around from the outside and say, oh, I'm a Chicano and Chicano power and all this bullshit. And they do nothing. They do nothing to change an organization for the better. And that takes a lot of work and organization and ganas. And the other thing is, I'll be quiet after this. We hit record highs in terms of members paying their dues. The most members paid dues during my administration, and we also had record highs in terms of contest submissions. And I'll tell you something very, 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 very forthrightly. As I say to people in Spanish, cuando viene el dinero, se callan la boca. The money comes in, and you're seeing you're successful, and you're keeping to your goals and to your principles. People stop talking, because talk is cheap.
Right. Yeah.
Getting in behind and actually running an organization and changing it permanently, that's actually a lot of work.
The money does talk.
And money talk, and it's not just money, it's success, it's interest, it's people saying this organization is going in the right direction.
Well,
it's all of that.
You brought up a question in my mind too, when you mentioned writers that are out there and not speaking up, or certainly don't belong to an organization like Texas Institute of Letters. Do you see an obligation among writers, Chicano writers, Latino writers, to speak up, maybe to write about their points of view, to express it in their own genre, or through other means, in order to get that word out?
Well, it is important to speak out, and it is important to get the word out. but it's even more important to get involved. To actually, being president of the Texas Institute of Letters cost me a book or two. It's more than a full-time job. And a lot of writers, and I won't mention names, but I could if I wanted to. And a lot of Chicano, very famous writers, they have a lot of ideas, but they don't do the work. Writing a statement is easy. Spending 2 years of your life changing an organization, root and branch, that's actually a lot of work. And as I said, I was not the only one who did that. It's really sort of I'm the succession of different presidents that have been going in that same direction. And so it is important to write. It is important to speak out, but it's more important to get involved. In an organization you want change, because I think Chicanos, should stop just being sort of enclosed within their own communities. You got to branch out. As I told David Bowles, I don't know if you know David Bowles.
Sure.
I told him I want to win. I don't want to just be the Chicano who complains about not running an organization. I want to win. I want to place people in power so that we win. Not just sitting around and taking pot shots. That's very easy. It's much harder to get involved and to be successful, because all of that takes organizing and work and sacrifice, which is you're not going to be writing. You're not going to be doing what you truly in your heart love, which is creating another story, another novel, another memoir.
Yeah.
So it costs time.
So now it looks like the task or the challenge for going forward is to maintain that the momentum that you and others have started, and I think maybe that's the next step to institutionalize, what you started and others have begun.
But I did appoint, Diana Lopez as my vice president. So she's now the president of the Texas Institute of Letters. And then I encourage her to go to get David Bowles as her vice president. So as much as it's institutionalized, somebody said, well, Sergio, what you're doing is you're creating a Chicano mafia in Texas. But it's about, change and wielding power. But people don't follow you. There are a lot of white writers, who followed me because he said he's doing good things for the organization. Of course, he's emphasizing and focusing on Chicanos, etc. But it's actually great writing. People start opening their minds and seeing, oh my gosh, El Paso and UTEP has fantastic writers, and we need to focus on them, for example. And so it is really trying to break open people's minds and trying to be more empathetic.
Well, I have to give myself and the magazine a plug, because one of the main principles of Somos and Escrito magazine and the foundation is to provide a venue for established writers that want to get the kind of audience that we have, and emerging writers, new writers who don't have a chance going to other publications to get published. And we have published a number of new writers. Some of them have gone on to publish their own books, and so forth. So I think that's a critical principle to keep kind of foremost in our minds as writers, publishers and editors and so forth. And as you say, you as a well-noted writer, you have a platform that not too many other people have. So I congratulate you on what you've accomplished.
I feel I really have done not much. I feel like I'm just getting started, and I don't think that's the other thing about certainty. When you start feeling like you've made it, that's when you go downhill.
Well, I said it's a challenge.
It is a challenge, yeah.
So, yeah.
And there's always a new fight to fight, frankly. Always.
Well, let's talk about your latest book. Scott, Jenny, have any questions?
Yeah, maybe I mean, the most glaring thing about it, I recall on social media, like when you had finished it, you announced, like when the pandemic started, you said, and you wrote about it in your book in the afterward, that I just finished a book on a pandemic. I hope this isn't anything clairvoyant. Maybe you talk. I mean, did the lockdown pandemic that I mean, it was already finished, right? So did that inform? How does it feel to write something as it happened?
No, not even as it happened,
As
before
it
it happened.
before it happened. I mean,
Oh, absolutely. You see, this is what's a little frustrating to me. The final draft that you have in your hand was turned in February 29th, 2020. Donald Trump was still president. And most of the book was actually written 2018, 2019. And what's happening in the book? Three teenagers, Turi, who's a Mexican-American from El Paso, Arnulfo, an undocumented from Juarez, who they meet in a chicken farm as they're working. And then later they meet Molly, basically a working class white girl who's 17 too, in a tiny little town in Steelville, Missouri. And they steal a truck, and they later find out that this truck has something awful in it. They think it's drugs, but it's actually something worse. And as these teens are going across country, the US starts falling apart because of a pandemic. So everyone, I thought, is going to think, oh, he got the idea from COVID, which is wrong. Absolutely wrong. It was all, there were maybe not even 20, but less than 20 cases of COVID before the final draft was turned in. And I just thought, and this is something to talk about amongst writers, imagination can be a predictor, or somewhat of a predictor, of what might happen. I mean, I just thought, what would unravel this country? What would set us against each other? Like perros, a pandemic, a virus. And my virus was very different. It was the Marburg V, which is related to Marburg virus that happened a long time ago, that had an 80% kill rate. And much worse than COVID, by the way. And it was not spread through the air. It was spread through contact, through exchanging blood, semen, whatever. But if you got it, 80% chance you would die. So the really, and of course, I just thought, this is what's going to set us against each other. So the novel is also about the grit and intelligence and luck of these three teenagers. And they're all people who are ignored, los de abajo, in many ways. They're working class, or even worse. And they find each other, and they don't belong anywhere else. They belong with each other, but not with anyone else. And as things start falling apart, they have to find solutions. Sometimes they find them by chance and just pure luck. Sometimes they find them because they think, and they're gritty, and they don't give up. Sometimes they lift one or the other. One of them is falling apart, and the other one lifts them out of that funk. And it goes back and forth. And this is about creating that togetherness that I think, within this small little group, that I think we don't have, or maybe we're losing in this country. That how we belong together when we go through very difficult trials. And so that was sort of my idea.
So maybe that's why we have like the guy from Mexico, the Mexican American, and the gringa, right? So they're finding a way to exist together and be friends.
Right. And they have very different outlooks on life. I mean, Arnulfo, the undocumented, he knows that the other two don't really understand the danger he's in, right? There's a scene in which he said, she doesn't understand that if we go to the police, I'm the one who's going to be screwed up. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, Turi, the Mexican American, the teenager, because they're all 17, he is bolder, in part because of his position, right? He doesn't have the police or the migra to worry about. But he's also has that confidence that whatever, I was born here, I should fight for my place, whether you agree with it or not. But he keeps pushing them to find their place here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to find my place here.
I think another thing I want to talk. So I mean, there's a tradition, American road trip novels. I'm always not a super fan of those in that they're based on tourism, manifest destiny, these kind of things. But and yours a road trip novel, but there's a big difference in that normally those novels are written, by Anglos and they go from east to west, but yours is going from southwest to east to Connecticut, which in many people's minds is Anglolandia, the whitest of the white, And I thought that was really interesting because we see so much exoticism, like the Southwest exotified so much, the West exotified, and right. It being in the mythologized and imagination, and people used to come here and be upset that everyone's on in costumes all the time. But yeah, the character in your book, it's a little bit random, but he sees this place is so green, it's like he's from the desert and this place is so green, he wants to go there, and so yeah. He's going east. And then there's many things happening. Maybe talk about this. I really love that section because this is us, and then it's also mirroring Chicanos going everywhere around the nation. We exist everywhere now.
The Chicano invasion, exactly. the Mexican invasion from the south, mm-hmm. At least it's portrayed by some idiots. But yes, but also the theme of the border beyond the border, which is true. I mean, if you read someone like Alfredo Corchado, he will tell you one of the reasons why you have more racism is because you have more Mexicans in places that there have never been Mexican, and like Connecticut, like El Barrio in New York City, and Kansas City, etc. And that is happening throughout the country, and even worse for some Republicans, some of these Mexicans are connecting, with Americanos, and you can't necessarily vilify them anymore when they're your neighbor, and they're doing stuff that might be similar or connected to you in a way. So I think I wanted to append all of those ideas, and why Connecticut? Because it is one of the cradles, so to speak, of New England, of the Pilgrims arriving. These are Pilgrims coming from the South, so to speak.
I had a question that I was going to ask much earlier, but I'm glad I haven't had a chance to do that. I was very interested in what you were saying anyway. But we have an idea, or we talk about Chicano literature. And I wonder how you would describe it. I think you've kind of been describing it as we've been talking, but how would you identify Chicano literature? How would you frame it? Is there such a thing? Or is there a becoming thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed. It's not, the stuff written in the 60s and the 70s, right. It's very different from the stuff being written now. Because in part because the Chicano writers have changed, right? And even the Chicano readership has changed, and even whether it's the people reading it are Chicano or not, it's just, and it's morphing just like any other literature would morph. Whether you're talking about some of the early writers, whether you want to consider Rodolfo Anaya, whom I got to know and befriend. Who's considered one of the fathers of Chicano literature, Rolando Hinojosa, or even, earlier writers like Sandra Cisneros, Denise Chavez, Ana Castillo, what they wrote about, changed over time, even within their careers. And then you got, the slightly younger writers, and I'm sort of probably, a little bit in the middle. Writing about other things, writing more about the Chicano middle class, or not belonging to the middle class, or trying to break through the middle class. And now, some younger Chicano writers, a lot writing about dystopias, or writing about, Chicano superheroes, fantasy stuff. Some of the most popular current, if you want to call it Chicano literature, is writing about superheroes and stuff. Because in part that's what the community wants. Some of the community wants. So to say this is Chicano literature, I think you're putting yourself in a straitjacket and imagining this is what it was in the 60s, this is what it was in the 70s, and it keeps morphing and evolving. Way back when Ben Saenz was writing, and I've had very, very long conversations with him. It took him about 20, 22 books before he sold more than a few thousand copies. He's now sold, several million on Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. But, Chicanos in the 70s and 80s, there were a lot of homophobia in our community, right? And beyond, not just our community, but beyond our community. And John Recchi, right? Chicano from El Paso. A lot of people who were, who were interested in gay issues bought his novel, but how many Chicanos bought it? He faced a lot of problems as a Chicano writer. But now, of course, with Aristotle and Dante and Ben Saenz writing, his brilliant work, it's not just hit a note with our community, but it's gone beyond our community. And he hasn't changed. You look at what he's writing about, it's still about El Paso, it's still about Chicanos, but now he's talking about young gay relationships and how people come to terms with that. But I think society has changed to accept it. And I think Margaret Atwood said this. I hope I'm correct in this. I saw a lecture of hers a long time ago, and she said, fiction is whatever you can get away with on the page, but whatever you can get away with changes with time. And I think that has happened to our community. It's not the same readership or community it was in the 70s or 80s, and it's still morphing into something else. So I think all of that is Chicano literature.
I think that's what the most exciting aspect of our discussion is, that we're talking about form of writing that, as you say, is morphing, it's developing, it's changing, it's going with the times in some respects, but also creating its own reality, or writing down the reality that either exists out there or that they make real by putting it on paper. I think that's pretty exciting. Any other questions, guys? Well, we have Sergio's attention here.
I mean, for me, I would have to say, I don't think that there's enough change. I mean, I still see a lot of work that's not written by our community, that's not written for our community, written for, the main, and as I'm a writer as well. And, me and my old writing group, we ran this reading series called Brown People Don't Read, because we literally heard that from agents, publishers, all across the board. Like, they say there's no writing community. So I think a lot of people, like people of color, brown people, Black people, they don't write for themselves. They write towards the reading Anglo public. And to me, that I've seen a lot of books that might as well have been written in the 80s. I think there has been change, right? There has been change. But to me, it's still like, we need more. I mean, I love that there's superheroes and different kinds of things, because if we can imagine our way into better things, there's like we're going to be doing the same thing, 100 years from now,
Right.
The same. And not that I don't like, the things that happened in the past, but like, we need to evolve. And I think literature, in a way, as you're saying, this wide way. But I think, not all, books sneak through, definitely through the mainstream now and then. But that aren't like what I'm saying. But I just see this like very often. I wonder, like, this book has been many people behind it. They're pushing it, and it's. I mean, this is. It seems dated to me. This, it could have been written. I mean, that's a problem with a lot of literature. It's still relevant right now.
Well,
It's like it's written yesterday because our issues haven't gone away.
well, Scott, you point out to a very interesting problem in the publishing industry, is that because the publishing industry, the commercial big publishers are still either New York or the West Coast. But there are a lot of other publishers, right? Smaller publishers, bigger publishers all throughout. But still the coast, especially New York, has these big commercial publishers where the people get the big money, where people get the big exposure. But the problem is, of course, is that they're surrounded not by a massive Chicano community. Like if they lived in San Antonio, it's a big 5 or 4 or whatever, I don't know how many are left, were in San Antonio, they would be publishing different books simply because of the exposure and the editors that they would be getting geographically from that area. And so that actually, I think, had hobbled, they're trying, and people do break through, but sometimes they also rely on stereotypes, because if the editors and the assistant editors and the agents are all from in and around the East Coast, either Boston or DC or Washington, or from San Francisco, it's going to be either very white, right? It's going to be not a lot of exposure, some exposure now more than ever, a little bit more than before to Chicanos in the community, but sometimes they don't know any better, and it's their fault. I don't think that's an excuse. But I think the other thing that they are seeing is that there are breakthroughs every once in a while, Luis Urea or whoever, there are breakthroughs, or Ben Saenz, the breakthrough. And believe me, one thing they care about is money, right? They see Ben Saenz sell 2 million copies, and they said, geez, we need another Ben Saenz, or whatever, whoever's that going to be. And so maybe Scott, I agree, it's never fast enough. It is never fast enough. But publishers are actually very conservative, and I don't mean politically conservative. I mean that they jump on the bandwagon when they notice, oh my gosh, the market is changing. Oh my gosh, we can sell 1 million copies of a Chicano gay writer from El Paso, and that's a hell of a lot of copies, and he's going to be #1 on the YA list in the New York Times. And so it is changing. It is morphing, but it's never fast enough. And
there's also waves too. I mean, I remember, like I graduated college in the 90s, and I thought, there would be more. There was a wave in the 90s where there was interest in Chicano literature, and I thought this would, this would continue. And then they went on like, no, it's the early 2000s. We like African Americans now. Let's publish everything, and then that changed. They go through these cycles, and but we're still writing.
right,
we're still here, and we're still got stories. It's
yeah, no, and you have people like Edward, Vidaurre, for example, starting Flower Song Press in McAllen. He won, I think, 2 TIL awards, Texas Institute of Letter Awards this year, and he was inducted as a member. And so you have other people starting their own presses, especially all throughout, and you see that in New Mexico, you see that in Texas, and
also Berkeley, California.
In Berkeley, yeah, no,
and Somos and escrito, we have our own practice,
right? And I think the more that happens, the better, because then at least you produce a book, and if you win a few awards and you get attention, and Ben Saenz did that. Ben Saenz published with Cinco Puntos, published with a lot of small presses, 20 books, 20 plus books before, he exploded,
All of a sudden he was discovered, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it's not discovered, of course. He's been working, 30, 40 years. But it's a confluence of events, and also talent, and also opportunity. And I, of course, I always wish that it would happen sooner. But I think that's part of the problem, that it's still a little bit too New York centric and too West Coast centric.
Well, the thing, I think in effect, we're only seeing what they want of ourselves, what they want us to see, and that's always like the what winds up happening, because I mean, there's certainly books that like I want to see, like Bless Me Ultima, that everybody has to read as required reading. That's a little bit after my time, but I mean, as far as like being required, but yeah, I mean, as we're small publishers, it's like it's getting our own community to look at us and other publishers like us is the whole problem. Getting to know, like, because I think of some of the books that come out of, like, Flower Song and Arte Publico and Atom Libre and all the other ones. Like, if when I was younger, I would have loved them. It's like, I literally saw. You never see yourself, and you never see something you relate to, even
right.
And we're all different, but it's like you have to sublimate yourself just to, like, in every story you start, this is when we probably could say that potluck starts getting birthed.
Yeah, and I mean, interesting, you mentioned Arte Publico. I published a couple of my early books for Arte Publico. I was talking to Nick Canelos last year, and he said they had their best year ever, selling books, the largest, Latino publisher in the country. So it is having an effect. It is, getting better. Is it what it should be? No, I don't think. I think that fight will continue for decades. And I think all of us should be fighting that fight, either locally or trying to get attention, trying to get an op-ed in the Washington Post or the New York Times or the San Francisco Chronicle, reviewing books, getting involved in organizations like the Texas Institute of Letters, appointing judges that are diverse, that are looking for books like the great writing from Flower Song Press, etc. I think it's a lot of little things and a lot of big things, and I certainly am a believer in that.
Well, I have to say that, unfortunately, that we're hitting about the hour, and just to end on a positive note in regard to what we're trying to do, the Somos Escrito Literary Foundation Press and the magazine, we're very much in your corner. I'd rather be in your corner than on the opposite corner.
Jenny did not ask any questions.
No, it's up to her.
Can you hear us, Jenny?
Oh yeah, I've been listening, but I also know that we're getting short on time.
It's okay.
So,
okay.
We have more time if you have a question.
Oh, I was just going to ask about something that you brought up earlier, which has to do with what you were just talking about. How did you, like you said, when you were working on editing the Nepantla anthology, and I'm sure in other, like, teaching creative writing and different things, like, what did you find helped to push writers past what they were nervous about writing, or where they were sort of, you felt like, okay, there's more to say here, there's more to get into?
Like how to take it to the next level. For me, it's about reading aggressively and frequently, and because I think when you read widely, it makes you so vicious on your own work. And I mean, when I was a judge for the Penn Faulkner, reread 493 books in 10 months. That's about 2 books a day. That's what I mean. That's kind of crazy, and they pay you to do that. But when you read so much, every phrase, every character, the little things, the rhythm of the sentences to the characterization, the construction of paragraphs, characterizations of certain characters, the settings, it just makes you vicious on everything, because to get to the last 5 or 10, everything has to be great. And so what you do when you read so much is you turn that lens on yourself, right? And you rip yourself apart, because of course, what is an editor going to do? They're going to look for chinks, problems, etc., starting with the first line, the first phrase, before you even get to the period. And so for me, it is about doing all of this work reading widely, developing, honing your aesthetic sensibility, um, and rewriting and learning the craft as much as possible. I mean, in my workshop, I'm known as a very tough teacher. I give my students work every day. They have to turn it in at the end of the day. And if they've come up with an excuse, I tell them, get out of my workshop. You're wasting my time and you're wasting yours. Because if you're not going to do that, you will never become a professional writer. You will never write something in which somebody's reading it and it just takes their breath away, and it shocks them what's on the page, and it brings them to, oh my gosh, this is so necessary. I have to get to the end of this. And to do that requires mountains of work. And let me just tell you about being an editor of Nepantla Familia. The worst thing about being an editor of Nepantla Familia is that you have to reject some of your friends, some of your very famous friends. You know, and you tell them, and I wrote emails. I don't get into, you know, telling people who I didn't accept, but this particular work did not work, you know, for this anthology, or there was a problem with the story or the essay. And I would write them very long emails because I know they're going to be mad at me. But I had to respect the book. I had to respect the vision and the craft of the other 25 people or 24 people who are in that collection. And so it wasn't, you know, El Buenazo, you know, XYZ, my friend, I'm going to put them in. I wanted a certain vision for Nepantla Familia. And that's what you have to do. The craft takes precedence, not your friendship, not anything else. And you also have to be able to explain to people why the craft is lacking in this particular story or this particular poem or this particular essay, and they have to believe you. And I had to tell you, everyone whom I did not accept understood it was not personal. In fact, they know for a fact that I admire their writing. It just, this particular piece didn't work for this anthology. But the people who made it in, I think they know, you know, what they wrote is great. And what they wrote is new, because very few things in the Nepantla Familias are previously published. Almost everything is new. And for me, it was respecting the book I was trying to create. And not even my prejudices or my views. It really respecting the idea and the craft of the book that I was trying to create on, with Nepantla Familias. And that's all I cared about. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I try to get my writers to take that next level. You know, all of those things that I've mentioned.
Thank you.
Maybe before we go, I'll say I'm a big fan of From This Wicked Patch of Dust and Nobody's Pilgrim, and maybe you want to I really enjoyed them. You have really great.
Well,
there's some limitude. You pulled me in, just like you're saying. Like I could, keep on going.
Thank you.
My filter's on too much. I can't really
Scott,
get. There we go.
I'm really glad you like Nobody's Pilgrim, Scott, because it was really about, in many ways, the hope of young people, and how the grit, and I was thinking of myself, of course, as a 17-year-old, but also thinking of my sons. I have two sons. And, we screwed up this world. The old guys have left this world in a big mess in many ways. And the young don't give up sometimes. And sometimes they're foolish not to give up, because there's so many freaking problems out there. But the grit and the hope that they have, that's what I was writing about.
Well, Sergio, thank you very much for your time and the inspiration from your words. We hope to see you again sometime soon.
Absolutely. And I hope I didn't say anything too controversial, but they can kick me out if they want. I don't care.
We'll see. Thank you so much again. And Scott and Jenny, thanks for joining me. We'll do this again, either with you soon, but we'll have other people coming, other writers coming to our forum.
I would love to do that. Just anytime, just send me an email and I'll do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Adios.
All right. Take care.